Thank you very much, everyone, for being at this presentation again. And for those who are going to be connecting later with the recording, I wanted to share today's goals for our presentation, and I hope that we can achieve them. First, I hope that you are able to, as audience members, learn about our submission requirements and also this anonymous peer review process. So what happens to your manuscript and once you submit it to the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy. And I'll take you step by step through what that process looks like or can look like online. You get to discover some strategies about how you can revamp and change your capstone, thesis, or research dissertation into a research article. So I'll be giving you some tips and some steps and some tricks that you can always refer to later, and that hopefully will just inspire you and invite you to kind of take that plunge into really sharing what you have done, your wonderful work that you are doing as art therapists, as student art therapists, as recent graduates as well. And then at the end of our presentation, I invite us all to do a little bit of art making. So it could be with a pen, a pencil, whatever it is. And then we're going to be talking about, you're invited to ask any questions that you want to me about what this process looks like. There may be some gaps, and there probably will be in terms of what I've explained to you. And so I invite you to come back and ask any questions, to talk about your experiences. And I'm hoping that this is one important piece that we are recording and sharing with you, and that it can also be an ongoing conversation with everyone who is interested. I am also so grateful for all of you for being interested in the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy and publishing art therapy research. It's a brave step, and being interested is a really wonderful thing. We are very grateful. So I include some of my art along with our presentation. The first part of this presentation is talking about the research submission process and the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy in particular. So what is the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy? Research, Practice, and Issues. So it is the Canadian Art Therapy Association's scholarly journal. So it's published by the Canadian Art Therapy Association. Most of you are members. We have been publishing for almost 40 years, so since 1986. And we publish biannually, so 2 times a year, and this year we are now paperless. And so that gives us a couple of benefits, which I will be talking about later, such as larger images that we can publish, and a little bit more flexibility in terms of the word count as well. So it gives us a little bit more freedom, which is really lovely, and access in different ways. So it is free to all the Canadian Art Therapy Association members. As part of your association membership, you're contributing to the publication of the journal. So of course you get it for free. People who are not Canadian Art Therapy Association members, so that's all members, student, ally, professional, registered members. But if you're not members, you can subscribe to the journal at a cost. So often hospitals or learning institutions of different kinds, colleges, universities, will subscribe to our journal as a package. We publish in French and English. And we also will translate the abstracts and titles. So if you publish in English, we'll translate your abstract into French. And our publication company will also translate your title into French. And same thing, if you publish in French, we'll be translating the abstract. So what's lovely is that our abstracts are bilingual and our titles are bilingual. And you're able to publish in French and English. Of course, it is Canada's 2 official languages. We abide by the Canadian Art Therapy Association standards of practice, and we do not accept, of course, submissions that perpetrate oppressive and colonial perspectives and biases in any way, and that's really important to mention. And also, Taylor and Francis, they are our publication company. So they are hired by us, and they maintain the online searchable database. They support us with the editorial manager system, which I will talk about further. So all of the databases, they maintain it. We hired them almost about 10 years ago, and they did this lovely job of actually, what do you call it, like scanning every single journal, because it wasn't all online at first. So about 10 years ago, they scanned every single journal article that we have published, and so they maintain that online database for us as well. So, what are the aims and scope of the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy? And we have revised our and scope to include a two-eyed seeing approach. So, what's really important is that we want to acknowledge and honor diverse ways of knowing and systems of knowing and practices. And I think Emily did a wonderful job at explaining how um, historically research and publications is like a white Western medical model way of knowing, and that there are different forms of research and different forms of knowledge holding and sharing that is really important to include. So, with the two-eyed approach, um, we are trying to enhance our profession and practice and knowledge with BIPOC and Western ways of knowing. So, through this one eye open, our journal scope focuses on empirical and original scholarly research with like that traditional ethical, say, research lens that you will see in universities. Um, and also with like a medical model and the traditional research language. And then through the other eye open, we honor, embrace anti-colonial, anti-oppressive, and indigenized art therapy research and practice. And we do this with a sense of all at onceness. So through both of our eyes, we create a culturally safe space for art therapy inquiry, knowledge sharing, and we want to enhance research and practice. So those are our aims. Talking a little bit more of our scope, we are advancing how we understand and use art therapy theories and innovative practices, art therapy interventions. So we want to advance it and move it further through sharing knowledge, through sharing what you are doing, through sharing your research and what you have discovered. And that comes from authors as contributors. And we also want to promote diverse ethical methodologies, lenses, views, and perspectives in our field. And of course, we need to further that. So we're furthering education in our field through, like, as students, you get to connect with articles, but also by inviting allied professionals and art therapy supporters into this circle as well. Um, and of course, decolonizing research practices, avoiding extractive approaches, at really countering and critiquing a biased lens, and giving platform and voice for diverse knowledges and ways of knowing and ways of seeing information and ways of practicing healing. And this is internationally. So the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy, so I'm going to call it CATAJ now because it's a little bit easier to say. I hope that's okay. So we have different sections and we've added different sections. So our first section is a cover artwork, and that includes an artist statement from the artist who has created the cover artwork. Another section is the traditional art therapy research articles, which usually have like a clear research tone to them. And again, research can be arts-based, it can be autoethnographic, it can be quantitative, qualitative, and there are different and diverse forms that continue to be innovated. Like, we continue to change and adapt what research methodologies look like. We have an art therapy and practice section. So this often includes more of our case studies and really talking about what art therapy looks like on the ground. We have art therapy approaches. So what this section describes is like theoretical understandings, or when authors say look at research and come and collect research to be able to derive new conclusions and meanings from it, develop new theories, so contemplate new theories, critique practices and theories. So really like a discussion-based style articles. With like a grounded understanding of literature and historical knowledge. And our sounding section is like, it sounds very arts-based, and it is a very arts-based section. So we're looking at, usually in that section we include, and it's usually like poetic inquiry, arts-based research, autoethnographies. So really artistic lenses and perspectives in this particular, and creative forms of inquiry of all different kinds in this section. And then we have the anti-colonial, indigenous, and/or two-eyed seeing approaches to art therapy. And we have Megan Ganeta Kahawe White, and she is a section editor, and she's also been a co-editor of a recent special issue. And so we are including Indigenous ways of knowing, knowledge from elders, and a two-eyed seeing approach, but really focusing on the Indigenous and ancestral and healing lens and perspectives of art therapy. So it's not that that section wouldn't be included in other ways, and that way of knowing wouldn't be in other sections. It's just really to honor Indigenous voices, BIPOC experiences, and create a space for that, and a section editor who is rich in knowledge about Indigenous ways of practicing art therapy. And then our final section are book reviews. And so if you are ever interested to even start research, a book review is a lovely way to do it. You get a free book, which is lovely. And also we have specific submission guidelines for book reviews. So it's pretty detailed about what we're looking at. And I guess a tip and trick, because we won't be talking about it in too much detail, is it's not about documenting what you have read, but it's really about how you see that book, how you experience that book, who you like, how you interpret it, who you think it would be important for. So you're analyzing it in a different way. But your unique perspective and knowledge as a person who is reading this book is what's really important to be able to include. And that like what you get from that book. Okay, so we have some submission guidelines. We have what's called the open format publishing guideline. And a lot of people have had questions about what this looks like. And I myself have also had those questions. And we really had to see what it was once we implemented it. So this was like an opportunity that we applied for with the publishing company. And what it is that we can publish, you can submit in any referencing format. So it can be APA 7th edition, it can be Oxford, Harvard, MLA. But what's important is that you include all the important details of whatever format you choose. And then Taylor and Francis takes that and they change it into APA when we actually publish it in the end. So they have like their own process when they're typesetting and copy editing it. But what's really important is that you have all the details of the references and authors so that we're able to kind of work with your manuscript. Yes, and when you submit, we invite you to submit one anonymous version of a Word document of your manuscript, in addition to a manuscript with all of your author details. So we would be processing your anonymous manuscript through peer review. And I think you probably are really good at anonymizing because of confidentiality. So you would think of yourself almost as a client to ensure that everything, all the information about you is confidential. If you did it at a particular place that people may know really well, to be able to just anonymize that. When you're referencing yourself, you would just say anonymous reference if you have published something previously. So the point of anonymous peer review is that we're trying to reduce bias as much as possible. So when the peer reviewers are looking at your manuscript, they don't know who you are. And then you also do not know who the peer reviewers are. So they're looking at it in a way that they can provide the best information without hopefully knowing who you are. And I've definitely had peer reviewers who have known the person, they just were able to recognize even if it was anonymous, and they told me and we would send it to somebody else. So that's how it would work to make sure that it is as anonymous as possible during that review process. You would be submitting your figures as separate. What is really helpful when you do submit is to make sure that you refer to your figures inside your text so that it's integrated in some way in your text. So refer to figure 1, for example, within your text. And then when you're submitting your Word document, just say, insert this figure here. So what that helps us do later is we have your figures as separate documents, but the typesetters or the people who are going to like put it all together in the end in like an article format actually know where to put your figures. Otherwise, I'll be asking you that in the end anyway. So it's better you just include it to begin with so that it just helps us skip that process. And I know that authors don't necessarily love to be bothered with a lot of back and forth. So that would help that process. When you are resubmitting, you would be submitting with a cover letter detailing changes. So the peer reviewers will provide meaningful feedback to you, hopefully as detailed as they are able to. And then when you resubmit, you provide a cover letter that responds to the feedback. And You can talk about the changes you've made. You can even use it as a checklist. Sometimes they've done that, peer reviewers, but I can show you like an example, a template, but it can be whatever template works best for you. Also, sometimes you may not agree with every revision because I try to submit it, or I try to send it to subject matter experts, and they do the best they can, but sometimes you may be a different expert and have a different way of knowing in a lens. And so that in the cover letter, you'd be explaining the why you may have not included particular revisions. So it is still a conversation in one way. There's a bit of like gatekeeper way, but it's also a conversation because I know that all members of our editorial review board and peer reviewers, their intention is we all want to publish your work. That's the ideal thing. So it's really about working together to make sure that it's in like a state of publication where it kind of reaches a certain standard, which is hard to always describe. But that's really what we're all working towards. And if you look at previous manuscripts that have been published, though, that's a lovely way of getting a good idea of what we're looking for in terms of details. And I'll be talking about that further too. So when you are submitting, I'm going through the process of submission. So you see a little bit about what that looks like. And then we'll be talking about the peer review process more later. Because it's really important to think about what we are looking for when you're submitting. So you submit on what's called the editorial manager website. And this website helps us like get all the information that we need when you're submitting a manuscript. And it goes directly to me, and there's an anonymous peer review process. So that's where everything's integrated. So you do not need to send me an email with your manuscript, but you would be submitting on the editorial manager website. And it is on the Canadian Art Therapy Association webpage, and it's also on our journal webpage as well. And what's lovely, sorry to go back, but Taylor and Francis is always adapting and changing. That's what they do. And so you're gonna sit and you're gonna find this page. Do you see my little cursor, by the way? Move around. Okay, perfect. Okay, that little cursor. So in this little star indicates that they're gonna actually get you to click here because they've created a new author submission process. So you're going to go to this landing page, but then you're going to click here because you're an author. And I think even if you logged in as an author, they'd probably find another way for you to get to this new web page that they've created. So I just wanted to show you this is a landing page, but it actually goes somewhere else at this point. So you click there, and then you go into the submission portal that they've created for you. So it separates you a little bit from the editorial, like the management system component, and it's made for authors who are submitting. So what you would do is that you would create your email, you would create a password, and you can also go back and forth a little bit that way with this submission portal. So you can pause it and save it at any time so you're not losing the information and data. Because when you do submit your manuscript, there are some pieces, they're called like metadata. So like understandings and like, I guess the information understandings of the manuscript that you're submitting. So like keywords, for example, would be metadata, but you'd be providing that information in like a step-by-step process. Author information would also be a part of the metadata component. So you would then come to this page. I've created a little bit of an example with my previous editorial that was, as you see, withdrawn, but you'd be able to track your submission. And I'll talk about how you submit soon. What is important about this page is that you see the status of your submission, you see the peer review process, and then you see once it is accepted, it would be sent to production. So you'll also be seeing the production process of what Taylor and Francis does to your manuscript, like the copy editing process and the proofing process and the typesetting process. So that's when they like format it. And you will also be able to see the publishing process. So once it is published. So it gives you a little bit more insight on each step of the manuscript publication process. It does take a lot of steps. It does take some time for these things to happen. Even like the production process, our internal deadline is usually about 2 months before our actual publication deadline. So when things come out. So there's a lot of different pieces that go on in the production process that you may get a little bit of insight and back and forth with like the production team. but that just happened before they're ready for publication, your manuscripts. So, oh yes, going back, this little section, top right corner, submit new manuscript. So I put a star right here. This is where you'd submit your new manuscript. And when you do, you go to this page. And this is that step-by-step process of all the information that you would be filling out. So you would you would choose, hopefully, the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy, but there are other journals there. And then you would go down and choose your article type. So that would be the different section: research article, art therapy and practice section, sounding section. The cover image is actually called pictorial because it's a picture. So that is why. So there's different, like, for example, the cover, the artist statement cover issue doesn't go through peer review. So that's why they all have different systems. And there's an editorial. So I would probably, or another, like if there's a co-editor, they would go through that process. So you would choose your article type here. You would press start, and then they will be asking you different questions regarding the metadata and a little bit about the research to make sure that it's ready for publication. They'll want to know whether you were the author or if there were other authors who were involved in the creation of the work. You would be consenting to their publication standards and author guidelines. You would indicate that you've seen our submission guidelines as well. What are some other things they ask you? They'll ask you if you got any funding for your research. So it's really important for us to know for transparency about funding, and also like to be able to acknowledge who has funded your work. There's a place for that. So funders love that acknowledgement. It's very important to include. You'd be including your abstract, your keywords, those are just some examples. And of course, your author details. So what are your affiliations? Who is the primary contact author that they would communicate with? For example, a couple of those pieces. So important pieces for us. It may be a bit burdensome and it may be a little bit annoying, and that's why you're able to save it so that you can go back in case you have to consult with your co-authors about their affiliations, for example, and how they would like to be represented. You're able to do so. So once you've created your submission and you get a submission number, and so I'm able to track that number and communicate with our production team about that number. You have your title here, you know which journal you've submitted to, and you also have the status. I withdrew this one. So that's what has happened. And when you say, look at that drop-down menu in terms of the submission category, you're able to see the dates of when things have happened. So you're able to track where your article is. So it may be with the editor, for example, or with the journal administrator. And the journal administrator is someone hired to help with the editorial manager system and peer review team. So they're from our production, Taylor and Francis. They're hired and they're able to help with some of those technical issues. And they also look to see if you've submitted everything that we've wanted you to submit. So they may come back to you and say, okay, you submitted an anonymous manuscript, but it's not quite anonymized. We need a little bit more, I know, just you included your name here, for example. And you are also welcome to connect with me anytime if you have any questions. If you see it sitting there in some section and you're wondering why, you can connect with me and say, what's happening with my manuscript? I'm happy to do that at any time. And it helps keep me up to date. So that is our first section. And now we're going to move into the peer review process, which looks at submission quality. So they're connected. And this will also probably give you insight about turning your thesis and capstone into a research article as well. So peer review purpose. So an editorial review board, they often comprise, so we have an editorial review board of usually about 12 to almost 15 individuals internationally, and they are usually scholars in the field of art therapy. And they usually love research, and they are interested and they have published before, and they have different subject matters that they're interested in publishing about. So we have a network of scholars there that are often peer reviewers, and we may also consult with external peer reviewers from our board as well. But they are there to look at the quality and the suitability of your manuscript. So that's who I would send it to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the peer review purpose, and then I'll talk about the process afterwards, and then what they're looking for. So they are here to help you. They want manuscripts to be published. We all have, they all want to support you. That's why they're doing this, and to support the field as well. So what do they usually look for generally? They look for contribution to the field. So how does this contribute to the field? Usually almost everything that you have done, in terms of your capstone, in terms of a thesis, there is some form of contribution. So indicating that even, this is how it contributes is really helpful for us to look at and look for. Alignments with the journal's aims and scope, making sure that your work aligns with it. We're looking at the study design and methodology. So really looking at the transparency. Appropriateness is really like, this is the purpose, this is the contribution, and seeing like how it relates to like the methodology and design. So if this is the purpose, and giving information and transparency about what you have done and how it relates to the purpose of your research. And research questions are usually a lovely way of tying those in together. You're including relevant and current scholarship. So I'm usually looking at editorial review board members or peer reviewers who have some form of knowledge, and hopefully they are subject matter experts in your topic. So they may provide more information and more literature and guidance on that could help like substantiate that area, because it makes sense. No one knows everything about everything, so you may not know. And if you, for example, you graduated in 2020 and with your capstone and your thesis, you may have to update the literature until 2024 when you're publishing, because there's a lot that happens in 4 years. They're looking at the ethics of your research as well, confidentiality, consent, how you've recruited, also ensuring that what you have done is like reduces oppression, increases strengths. So an anti-oppressive lens in practice. Your results are clear and organized. So if they're really connected, your results are really connected to the purpose of your research. That's really important to be able to connect that. Conclusions are reliable, significant, and supported. So you can mention how significant, why it's significant, and supported is really connecting it back to the initial literature that you've included. So you're connecting the results in the conclusion back to like the research that you mentioned. So you're creating that like full circle approach. And the work is of high enough standard. So really that standard is like the transparency, the clarity, how it's organized, and just making sure it's very organized for them to be able to look through, and just making sure that your writing is clear as possible. So above all else, go for that clarity, not the run-on sentences, break those down and increase the clarity as much as you can. It makes sense that it's initially complicated, and you may have to go through a couple levels of revision until it becomes extremely clear. Okay, so the peer review process. Okay, so you see my little cursor. So what does it look like? So you would be submitting an article up here and to the editorial manager system, and then our support person looks at it, makes sure you have everything. He may come back to you and let you know if you don't have everything yet, and then it comes to me. So I look at it and I see, okay, is it ready for peer review first? Is it suitable? Some manuscripts don't talk about art therapy and it gets submitted to our journal. Some manuscripts are just not quite clear enough, and we have this lovely team of editorial review board members. They are busy, it's a volunteer role, so I need to make sure that it's ready for them to review. So that's what I do in terms of my initial assessment, is just see if it's ready. Otherwise, I will get back to you. Either, it's not talking about art therapy, there are a couple of pieces that would be really important that are missing. And I would give you some like overall large things to work on. Okay, so if it is ready for peer review, I find some peer reviewers who are experts in the field, and I try and balance them as much as possible. I try and make sure that no one will know each other as much as possible. And then I I invite them to review the paper, and also I see if they're available. Some are not available at all times of the year, and that makes sense. And then they come back to me and they review. It takes a month. Sometimes if it's like a subject matter expert, it may take even like a month and a half or a couple months because we just want that particular person to review it and they're busy. Life happens, but they get back to me with their review. Some are very quick. You never know. You never know. It's all people behind this. Um, and then they provide their reviews, and it's usually a balance. So sometimes they may not agree. So some people may provide one review that is like perfect and accepted. Another person says revise and submit. I would look at it and try and usually choose something in the middle, but I'll usually choose something related to like more revisions are needed, just to make sure that it's right and ready. Because this is a community of practice, and even research and publication, it's a community where we're all trying to support everything to be the best it can be. And sometimes their perspectives contradict a little bit. And in that cover letter, for example, include a lot of details, but also make it more succinct, which is a challenge to do. And so in your review letter, you can tell me what decision you have made regarding what works the best for you, if it is unclear when you're actually end up doing it, because you are also an author as well, and you are a subject matter expert, or you are working towards that. And because also we are now online, we don't have that limited page count like we used to in the past. So err on the side of details. That's okay with us. So then the editor assesses the reviews and I make a decision, and I could inform you that, it's not ready, it's rejected, or there are revisions required. I'll tell you what the feedback looks like soon. And then it goes back to you and you submit a revised manuscript and it goes back to me. And I may send it to other peer reviewers. If someone had like a lot of revisions, like a revise and resubmit, I may send it back to see, is everything right by your lens and what you saw? Or I will be able to provide kind of like the copy editing phase. Most manuscripts, I've never seen a manuscript just be accepted right away. So that almost never, ever, ever happens. There's always a couple of little things that could tweak and help it, what I've seen in my experience. Also, most manuscripts at least go through 2 rounds of reviews, because one review is the peer review stage, which is really important. Often there are substantial changes, and then afterwards you're still coming back with like putting everything together. And then it's really normal to have a copy editing stage where like somebody looks at it and provides copy editing, because once we send it to production, the copy editing shouldn't be as big. We need to reduce the copy editing before it goes to production, because otherwise it becomes like a big deal. So now so it's really normal for it to go through a couple of rounds of revision and a couple more rounds of revision. So usually even 3 revisions could happen, even more may happen, but it's quite normal. So don't be dissuaded. It does happen, and you don't always have to agree with everything. It's still a conversation that can go back and forth. So what are some of the different article decisions? So this is a drop-down menu that we get to choose from, and there are quite a few options. So accept without amendment is usually what happens after like round 2, I would say, of revisions, of like tiny copy editing, like these are some information that would be helpful. Or it could be the first round, but it's very rare. Some peer reviewers will accept with minor revisions. The other one is accept with major revisions. Sometimes it's in between both of them. So I will try and edit it, my letter to you to include just accept with revisions. The revise and resubmit is another category that's chosen. So that's if there are like more substantial revisions to be made, like in terms of probably the organization or formatting, or like pieces that are missing that would be really important to include. We don't always know what would be really important to include in our research. So it's normal to have this type of feedback. We have a desk reject. So that's when I look at it, and unsuitable would usually be it doesn't quite refer to art therapy. It may not like fit within our aims or standards or practices, and it may not even talk about art therapy. So that's usually a desk reject would be before I send it to peer review. A DES reject of unsound would usually be the formatting is like really hard to read and it's not ready for peer review at this time. If it's really, really difficult to read, for example. So I'd recommend proofreading, although proofreading at any stage is really helpful to have because when you are doing edits, it's normal to have little minor errors that happen. Except without review, that would usually just be something when it doesn't go through peer review. I don't think it's ever really happened. It's like if I send an editorial through or send the cover artist statement just through. So that's usually what that one is for. And we have reject unsuitable and reject unsound, and that's if it goes through peer review. And it's just not ready yet by what the peer reviewers believe at that point in time. Okay, so then this is what they look at. So the peer reviewers have a list and like a drop-down menu or like for themselves where they look at these different components. And this is guidance for our peer reviewers team, any anonymous peer reviewer. And this one is like very standard. We did have one for arts-based research, but realized that like it's so standard that it's just little parts that can help provide guidance. And then they provide more details afterwards about what it actually means. And they provide like even some peer reviews provide copy edits as well. So they look at whether something is excellent or good or barely acceptable or not acceptable. The language is not great, and we're looking at more strength-based approach, but we also want clarity because sometimes it could be even more confusing if we're trying to say it in a certain way and then, but it's not very clear. So they look at whether it adheres to the aims of the journal. They look at the organization and structure of what you've submitted. So is it organized? Is it structured in a way that people can understand and read through it? Is it very clear? Thinking about your headings and making sure that they're just like clear. The easier they can read through it, the more they can get from it. Style. So how is your writing style? Art therapy is a unique discourse, like of this like arts-based medical model. The way that we talk and the way that we communicate and the way that we write is pretty unique. And every field has their way of writing and talking. And of course, language changes over time, but we're usually looking for like language that art therapists use, particularly, and in ways that we communicate with one another, which you usually have at this point in time. And if it's already an accepted capstone or an accepted thesis, you've got that part. And also your writing style. Is it clear? Mostly, is it clear and concise? Another thing also is specific pronouns is really helpful. So like they, this, that can be really confusing. So really going back and not necessarily saying the population, but who the population is. Like being as descriptive as possible with those little pronouns increases that clarity. The research methods, again, clarity, really that transparency so that anyone can do that research again. So if someone read it, that they be able to do it again as much as possible. So include what you have done. Your findings, they're looking at, okay, are the findings connected to the research methods and how you perhaps analyzed it or looked at the data or the final contribution to art therapy. You can flat out write what your contribution to art therapy is, and that is usually in the discussion section. And contribution to and implications for art therapy practice. So what does it mean for an art therapist when they read your manuscript or article? What would it mean for them? Like if you were to read it, what would you really want to take from that? What does it mean to you? Why is it important? So it's really important to include that. And we love limitations and delimitations as well. That's really important, and it can actually help with your recommendations for future research because all different research methodologies have different limitations. Quantitative doesn't have all the wonderful details that are really important to understand people's like unique experiences in this world, and then qualitative and arts-based may not apply to everybody because we're talking about the details. So it's really helpful for us to know what the limitations are and what your recommendations are based off of those limitations. And what could be a lovely thing to do is that once you include your limitations and recommendations, you could then do future research based off of your own recommendations. So it's a lovely little indicator or help especially if you published it before, to say, okay, well, these next steps would be this, because these are the limitations. This is what I'd love to do. And then you can apply for funding or like a PhD next or something like that, or do it in your practice next as a next step. So there are nothing wrong with limitations. Okay, okay. So journal article reporting standards. So these are just beautiful resources that help journals know what are standards for reporting. And it has been developed by the American Psychological Associations. And as we are connected to the field of psychology, and we do publish in APA formatting as our final product of the articles, it's really, really helpful to know. So I often refer our any authors or new authors, to the journal article reporting standards in terms of really knowing what would be important to include in your final piece, to be like concise and precise. So they have one for qualitative, and it's any descriptive data. So arts-based research could also be like a helpful way to format arts-based research in general. Qualitative meta-analyses, so that's really when you put a bunch of research together and look at the final conclusions. That would be a helpful journal article reporting standard. And basically, these reporting standards, it's a website from the APA. Then they have your different sections, like what your article would fit into. And then they have this beautiful PDF that I'll show you an example of. So there's quantitative as well, mixed methods research. And then there's also a new one, which is really important for race, ethnicity, and culture. So ensuring that we are including anti-oppressive language, strength-based approaches to how we are working with people from diverse backgrounds. And that is often the case. So really ensuring that we have a strength-based lens and an anti-oppressive lens and a supportive, inclusive lens in our language, because language is very important. So what does a journal article reporting standard look like? They provide a PDF file. Here's a qualitative example of different parts. So they really broken down the different parts of different sections and different subsections, and guidance for the authors, and also guidance for reviewers as well. So that you really know what to include. So in the title page, for example, key issues and topics under discussion, we usually love to include also the population, your methodology for us. So when someone's reading your manuscript, they know exactly what you did and what you were studying, the implications, what you were studying. You usually like an intervention, for example, that's unique or in a specific context. There are important details to include in your abstract. Again, the population, your methodology that you used, how you came about the conclusion, some kind of analysis method, what were the results of it, and then like implications, one sentence on the implications or recommendations. So we really get to see like in the abstract exactly what happened. Like it's like a little like brief capture. And it's a really lovely process to be able to synthesize what you've done as much as possible. And I'm going to go to the next slide, but you see that it's a PDF, it's guidance. And I think that when you are changing and like reducing and making your theses and your capstones more precise into a research article, this would be a really lovely way to start, is just creating like a formatting or like a, what do you call it? Yeah, like a template for you, for example. Because as reviewers, we're also looking for guidance on how to do it, and it changes over time. So these websites are always living and changing as well. And it's always being revised. We're always also critiquing ourselves in the process. So I just kind of provided an even more concise version before we go into break about the qualitative journal article reporting standards, because it often is really important. So you make sure that you have all of these headers, and they could change, they could be different, but some way of knowing, like the introduction is really the context, what is happening, the goals, and what your purpose is. And the literature review, including your population, the intervention, the topic that you're looking at. And you can talk a little bit about the methodology. That would be really helpful. In the methodology section, the ethical parts, like the ethical considerations. What did you consider? How did you like support these individuals or even yourself? Like, if you're including autoethnography, how did you keep yourself safe in this process? So like that risk reduction and minimizing risk and supporting and strength-based, like supporting people in a way that respects and honors their integrity. And that includes yourself as well. Your theoretical orientation is really important and qualitative and in arts based. Like, where are you coming from? Because you're looking at your unique lens and you're looking at like information rich detail. Your design, so a couple of how you collected the data, how do you analyze the data, your population, how you recruited them. So that all it like that transparency is a methodological integrity, and also like you should triangulation, so including three different ways of looking at the data. If you were doing qualitative research, even arts-based, so like different forms of data that you're looking at all at once and then combining together to increase like the methodological integrity of your work. So you organize your findings, the next section, themes, artwork, quotations. So really what you have found and connecting it to the purpose and discussion. You're connecting your findings to the literature, you're contextualizing it. So you're going back to that literature section and you're just making that connection again as a full circle. What is it contributing? Because that's what you're kind of talking about the problem. So then you can talk about how you've contributed to understanding the problem more even, or like resolve some of those pieces in your work. And then limitations. Delimitations is like you've chosen to limit the scope of your study, which is normal. We all have to do it. So it's normal to limit what you have done, and you've probably made conscious choices. So mentioning that is helpful. And any alternative explanations. So you have this data, but there's different ways of looking at it. And again, it could be a couple of sentences, it could be one sentence, it could be concise, but it's helpful to include, and implications and recommendations. What does it mean to our field? How does it contribute? What could be done next that would be really, really, really helpful? So the cover letter template. So when you are responding to peer reviewers and to myself as editor, really I'm looking at the cover letter to see how you've responded to the reviews and to get your voice and perspective as well. And again, you can agree with some of the peer reviews. You may not agree with all of it, and that's okay. But mentioning how and why. So a template would include a couple of important components. You can address me, you can address the peer reviewers, you can address the team. You're kind of dear us, so we are people. And then you discuss the feedback and how you responded to the reviews. It could include, for example, even a checklist or a chart of things that you've done, so you can keep yourself on track that way. And any changes that you may have not chosen to make in a rationale for that. And often ending in gratitude is helpful because we are in relationship with one another, and I find that it's just lovely, and the peer reviewers also appreciate that as well. So some way of like, okay, like took it in, maybe it was a little hard, but thanks for the time. So that could be really helpful. Okay. So coping with peer review feedback. We try as the editor and also peer reviewers to provide feedback in words that are helpful and supportive. Sometimes we don't get it right. And we apologize for that if we say something that's just like very information rich. So it's hard to get feedback. Of course it is. And it's hard to put ourselves out there and submit something and get feedback. So it makes sense to take time to process and cope with peer review feedback in any way. And peer review feedback can be good and it's wonderful and awesome. And it could be also like information that may feel overwhelming at the time. So I invite you guys, a couple of tips, take a break, engage in self-compassion and self-care, take a, soothe yourself whatever way, take a walk, have some tea, whatever makes you feel really good. It's normal when you're looking through the feedback to like engage in some kind of self-soothing behavior. All of us go through it. And we all give each other feedback, even as academics, peer reviewers, we're all doing it all the time to each other. So it can be hard. And some peer reviewers maybe, or even like we're all stressed out sometimes. So maybe we don't say it in the right way. What could be helpful as art therapists is even creating arts-based responses or mind mapping about the feedback to make those connections, to kind of maybe connect and understand what they are responding to and also relating it to your intentions as well. So art making can be a lovely way of connecting what may feel disconnected at the time. And then you can start even working on the cover letter from the beginning. So that way you can start and you can include the checklist and go back and forth a little bit. So you don't have to include it at the end as something extra. But to start that way, then we're much more in conversation as you are including your feedback. Um, and it is wonderful before you resubmit to send it around to people, not even subject matter experts, but even like people you know, to just provide a peer review or a proofread of some kind. So some people who are even outside of the field can provide really meaningful proofreads about what may not be like clear, or what may sound a bit jargony, or like, I don't get this, I don't understand it. So that can be really helpful as well, to just send it around a little bit to get feedback before you send it back. Uh, and I know that some student art therapists, you may have mentors as well, or even professional and registered art therapists. So connecting with mentors could be really helpful. Okay, moving on to our big revamp. So you are engaging in a big revamp by trying to make something that felt so big at the time, a thesis, a dissertation, a capstone, and then like synthesizing it into this tiny article. So I'm going to provide some tips and tricks that I hope will be really helpful for you. And you're welcome to refer back to them at any time. So first, we're going to differentiate what are some key differences between a thesis and capstone and an article. And I'm including thesis and capstone in the same category because a capstone, you're still answering a question, you're still conducting something, and you're still arriving at answers. So it is just as meaningful to submit a capstone and a thesis. And the capstone may fit more into, for example, the sounding section or the art therapy and practice section. There are places for it, and it is meaningful. They are meaningful contributions to the field. So first, the purpose. So when you're creating a thesis and capstone, you are looking at like, usually you're being assessed on how much you know, because this is your like cumulative project at the end of your degree, or diploma. So it's the end. So there's a big educational component, and that's where all of that substance and the details come into play. You're also working often towards advancing the field in some way, and making it better in some capacity. So there's that form of connection with the article, and the primary intention is to advance the field in some way. Second of all, you're looking at your audience. So you have professors and evaluators, external evaluators, looking within usually academia at your thesis and capstone, and you may have other students look at it as well. An article, your audience, you're looking at, I guess, researchers are going to be like consulting your article later, even 20 years down the line, you don't know. So you are connecting with researchers, you're connecting with art therapists, you're also connecting with the editorial review committee in general. So we're all looking at it. There's a couple of different people who are going to be looking, and of course, students and future researchers as well. So the length of a capstone is longer, 50 to 100 pages. With an article, it's usually about 2,000 to 5,000 words. Our limit is usually 2,000 to 4,000, but our therapy details, it's important. And again, we're more flexible now in terms of our word count, because what's more important is that you said what you need to say and it all fits within a cohesive narrative. Your abstract, usually with the thesis and capstone, is 350. You are reducing that, but also increasing the precise details to a T with an article, which is usually 150 to 250 words. And we always include a range as well. Your introduction is often detailed. So with a thesis and capstone, you're really talking about why you were doing this research, where you fit in. A problem purpose statement with questions is often how they begin. Whereas the article, it's much more succinct. You're really looking at the gaps in the purpose of your research. So you're identifying those gaps. Your methodology section is extensive, whereas in an article, you're including the purposeful details. So what gives it the most purpose? Although we do love a clear, concise, transparent methodology section above all else. Your discussion section in a thesis, comprehensive. You are talking about all the things that you know, whereas in an article, you are revising it to be a clear and concise interpretation with the main findings to address your purpose. So the main findings are the most important. A mind map can be really helpful of making those connections with your main findings. And you will, like, it is a revamp. You will be looking at it and reconnecting and making different connections. So you're really diving back into your thesis when you're making it concise. Your references and appendices are usually exhaustive. In an article, they are selective. So who are the main authors? Although highly referenced, when you're referencing a lot of people, it's really helpful in a research article, and it's really helpful to attribute the people who've done such wonderful work that you are then extending and scaffolding. So there's a space for being supportive and also thinking about diverse voices when you are referencing as well. Okay, so what are some helpful steps to consider when you are revamping? One is your journal selection. So we are honored that you are here in this workshop, and hopefully you will choose the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy, and there are diverse journals that may have a different audience that may be meaningful as well. Your central message and focus. So this could be the art making part, and this could be a mind mapping part, is really thinking about what is the central message, what is the focus of your manuscript and your thesis. And that could be included in your title as well. Usually that first component of the title could be that central message, and then you include the details afterwards. Population, methodology, intervention, and audience. So who are you writing to? We discussed that a little bit. And who would you want to read your research? And that could also help in terms of what kind of article type you choose and what section you would like your manuscript in. Your purpose and aims. Really clear about your purpose and aims in the abstract, in the introduction, and then revisiting that in that discussion section and making sure that your purpose and aims are connected to your methodology. So yeah, you are, this is what I want to do, and this is how I went about it. And then I went about this to do exactly what I wanted to do, or it didn't work out, and that's okay. We like to know things that don't work out too. That's very, very helpful information. And it does increase vulnerability, but vulnerable voices as researchers and that sense of vulnerability is also really important because there are people behind the work, and even in autoethnographic research or arts-based research really connects with that. And it's helpful to know because it's all useful and helpful information. And talking about how to add value to the field. So in terms of like when you are reorienting and revamping, to think about how does this add value and to state it directly. And consider the references that you use. So if you use specific references, maybe those are the journals you would like to submit to because you are using that kind of discourse and those particular authors. And so that could be helpful too. And alternatively, would it make sense as a book? Are the details really important? Is it formatted in a chaptered approach? And if so, then you can actually connect with the publishers, like even Taylor and Francis, you can connect and create a proposal for a book. So maybe it fits as a book, and that's okay too. Maybe it fits as different sections of articles. So one article may be your particular lens and approach and like your like thoughtful voice. And the other one is the particular research methodology that you used. And another one could be like you did an extensive wild literature review and it was done in a systematic way. And so that could be a separate article. So it could take different forms. Okay, some tips and some steps. So I highly recommend creating an outline, just like the journal article reporting standards. It is clear, it is concise, it is helpful for everyone in the process to just review. It may be a little bit annoying, but the clear process is extremely helpful for everyone involved because we want to publish your work. And to answer some of the questions that they include in the journal article reporting standards. You can even think about it in a question format and just answer those questions step by step. To review it. So what is focused, make sure it's focused, essential, and succinct. So to limit your jargon, to make sure that your acronyms are also reduced as much as possible, reduce repetition, and ensure that your sentences are clear. Even if they are like very simple sentences, straightforward, this is what happened. It's much more helpful than a longer sentence that connects different topics together in a complex way. So anytime, yeah, just think about when after you include the and, do you need that and, or should it be another sentence? And then define those pronouns, really making sure you're using specific pronouns. So that will help it be focused, essential, and succinct. Proofread for language. So discourse, art therapy discourse, like what are the terms, what is important? You probably are able to speak in that discourse, and I imagine that by the end of your degree, you may have a really good understanding of art therapy and talking, and like how we communicate with one another. But every field has different discourse. So it's really, really helpful to be able to see different fields in that way. So if you were publishing in a medical journal, you'd be using a different discourse. And if you're publishing in a humanities journal, it would be a different way that people are connecting and talking to each other. And of course, ensuring that your language is inclusive and anti-oppressive. And then, of course, grammar, making sure you're looking for your aims, just like what are the aims of each paragraph, and also making sure you continue to connect to that purpose of like, what were you doing? What was your intention? And connecting it back. And then formatting, thinking about really precise headings. And yeah, that should help, I think. And that starting with the heading, starting with that outline can be really helpful. Engaging a team, like I mentioned, colleague, a friend, supervisor, to edit, to look at your work afterwards, to give you feedback. Again, you can take the feedback, and it's normal when you send it to multiple people for people to disagree. So it's good practice. And then you make that final decision about what makes the most sense. And then a final proofread. So there are multiple levels of proofreading that you could do. First, you can proofread for content. So first you create whatever you need to create, just like a painting. You just let it go, create what you need to create, write it down so that you actually jump in and do it, because that's the hardest step. Afterwards, you can proofread for content. Afterwards, you can proofread for grammar. Afterwards, you proofread for like whatever formatting style. So that gives you a little bit like, then you're only looking for one thing, and it should help so you don't feel so overwhelmed in the proofreading stage. General comments. So these are just some recommendations. So like I had mentioned, do some complete levels of revision. So you do different levels of it. Like when you're proofreading, look for the content, then you can look at the paragraphs. Does each paragraph make sense? Even writing, for example, beside each paragraph, like what the reason for this paragraph was, like what the purpose was, could be really helpful. And then the more you write and the more you write research, the easier it will be, and you wouldn't have to break it down in this step-by-step process. But these are some ways and some strategies that can help. And you may like end up being a beginner writer and it becomes really hard and then it becomes easier. And then all of a sudden it gets really complicated again. You move back to those initial tips and tricks. And then afterwards doing the grammar, spelling, and formatting. So some questions to think about as you're reviewing. Does my paper balance detail with conciseness? That is hard to do. But that is usually what I think the main feedback that we ask is like, these are the details that are missing, but be concise. And you're like, oh my God, that's hard. So, so when you're reviewing your piece, you can review for that. So you can have that in your head, but not the first time you write it. Second or third time you review it. Can someone else repeat my research methodology if they read my paper? So if someone was reading it, could they do it again? That's the kind of clarity that would be the most helpful for us. Are my titles clear? Do you include your population, your methodology, your intervention, and your purpose? Some methodologies are about exploring, other ones are about explaining. So those descriptive terms can also be really helpful. Some are about finding results and assessing. So those words are really important to include. But you can't necessarily assess in an exploratory study. Like an arts-based study is usually focusing on exploration and like looking at conclusions or looking at multiple forms of seeing something. Are my sentences simple? Are my paragraphs complete? So usually 3 sentences make up a paragraph as a tip. So that's helpful to make sure that your paragraphs are complete. Is the purpose of my research clearly stated? The purpose is this, and it's hard to find that purpose. but that's the essential part, like connecting to that essential heart of your research and stating it at the beginning, in your abstract and at the end really helps everyone be able to understand what your intention was, to be able to help you say, talk about things in more detail, or just be able to understand it and say, all right, purpose, you did it. Makes sense. Um, are my headings and subheadings informative? So looking at your headings and subheadings as important factors. Also your figure titles. So the titles of your figures, the titles of your tables, making sure that they include the details that you want people to see when they're reading it is really helpful for us as reviewers. Some authors, if they are including their own artwork, will also cite and reference their artwork as an artist. So then it's its own publication, because art is like it is like a form of knowledge, and it is a publication in itself. So it depends how you want to use your figures, but if it's like an artwork that has been previously published or I often will do that myself. Um, then you're using that lens of artist too, if you are including your own art. Does my paper adhere to a referencing style? So what referencing style, whatever one you choose, just make sure it adheres to it and that we have all of the details, because we'll be going back and asking you for those details later. Okay. And remember, just jump in, just start. Just jump in, just do it, send it along, send it. It's hard to be motivated. I understand, especially after completing a thesis or a dissertation or capstone, but just do it while you're still motivated. It's so helpful. We want your lens, we want your knowledge. And we want to be a platform for you to share this, because you're creating something much bigger. And peer reviewers are here to help you. That's their intention, is to help you, and we're here to help you. A cover letter can be conversational, so it's okay to disagree. You don't have to completely withdraw your manuscript if you don't agree with some of the peer reviews. Journal article reporting standards checklists are helpful. Different feedback, so you may get different feedback before submitting, so sending it to other people, that's also very helpful, even outside of the field, people you trust, mentors in the field as well. Research methodologies are expanding and they're changing, so you may not feel like a research methodology fits with you, and sometimes finding that lens and finding your theory and finding the way that you see the world can be a good way of finding that research methodology. But there are very arts-based ways now, and there are creative practices that can really support what you are trying to find and how you want to discover in the way that you see the world and knowledge. Your theoretical orientation is important. How you see things is important. And you've got this. Hang on, you've got this. It's not easy, but you completed a degree, after a bachelor's degree, so a post-secondary degree and diploma, like you've got this. It's a process, and we do appreciate it. And we do appreciate you submitting and you being involved. And then also sharing your work once it's published too. That is so helpful, of finding different platforms. We can work together to share your work. So connecting with us. Okay, I shared it on this platform. Can you guys, promote it? And we would love to, in as many ways as we can.
So the first question we have from the chat is from Mia. They write, when you say the journal is free, does that mean it's free for members to publish in, or does it mean that accessing and consulting the journal is free? I think they're referring to the CATAJ.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So anyone could submit. It is free to submit. There is something called like an open, so we have a firewall in our journal has a firewall where CATA members can access reading the journal and the articles, and then people who subscribe to it also can read the journal and articles. So different associations, organizations, people can do it. I think the cost is, like, for people, it's pretty inclusive. For organizations, it's a bit larger. So yes, so you guys are able to access it, read it however you want. As CATA members, other people would have to pay to be able to share. And it's just like a magazine subscription in a way. It's a traditional journal thing that happens. Some articles are open access, and that depends on a couple of factors. Some authors actually get do you call it, funding to be able to provide and pay for open access. And because like we are paying a publisher and the publishers all have like people who are hired to like do these jobs, it's like, we're paying for all of that. And that's what comes into the journal subscription process. So that's why it costs to be able to access the journal and to publish open access. But anyone could submit at any time. It is definitely free to submit and publish anytime. So it is free for all authors to submit. Does that
Okay, thank
answer
you
your
so
question,
much.
Mia? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mia, if you'd like to elaborate on your questions, if you're still unsure about something, you can unmute and you can.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
Well, so I can submit my article and it's free.
Mhm.
And if it's accepted, it's still free. I don't have anything to
Nope.
pay.
No fee to pay if it's accepted.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Also, authors who submit their article and publish their article, once it's published, you have quite a few copies. I think it's like 50 copies. There's a number of copies that you're able to send to everybody that is outside of, the subscribers to the journal as well.
Okay, that's great to know. If there's nothing else for this question, we can move on to the next one. This question is submitted by Charmaine. The question is, can you submit the same article to multiple journals if you change them slightly as not to self-plagiarize?
That is a good question. We want every article in every journal wants original scholarly research, so it has to be original. So the content and what you are researching on has to be original. Um, some journals, like if it's like a magazine or something, they may say it's okay to publish it somewhere else. If it's like a magazine. So usually scholarly journals, it's original content. But if say you published in a magazine before and they allow you to publish again, what you would do is you'd mention in your article, it has been published here in like a magazine in a different format in a different way. So that helps a little bit.
Mhm. And just chiming in before we check in case
Mhm.
Charmaine has any other questions to expand on that. I'm assuming this also would go for, let's say, a student who has published their thesis or capstone within their own university or institution's database, for
Yes,
instance, because I
absolutely.
know, yeah, because I know a lot of students have chosen to have their work accessible in the database, and perhaps when they move on, they're like, oh yeah, technically I do have this work circulating, so putting
Yes,
that out there as well.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's not considered a separate publication if it's within a
Mhm.
university or school database in
Okay.
like a thesis or capstone format.
Mhm. Okay, great.
Thank you.
No problem. If there's no other comments from Charmaine,
No, that's
uh,
everything.
okay, no problem. Thank you. Thought I would just ask. We can go to the next question from Stephanie. Could/should we speak to Haley to best determine which article type is the most suitable for our manuscript? If we submit under one type, but the editorial team thinks it's better suited to another, would we find that out before it's sent out for peer review?
That's a good question. Sometimes it changes over time. So the peer reviewers may have a recommendation about what section it would fit best in. Because say you think it's a research article and it works, but it's much more of a practice focused article, then the peer reviewers would mention that to me. So they do switch around a little bit in particular categories. And then at the end, there's like an editorial decision about where they all fit together and connect together at the end as well. So it may shift a little bit between those specific categories.
Mhm. Okay. And if that's okay,
Yep, that
Stephanie,
works.
yeah.
I submitted a whole string of questions there,
No
so I'll just
problem. I know,
go
I
through
know, and
them
I want
all.
to
Go
make sure
ahead.
that we get to all of them, but that you're okay with
Perfect.
what we've answered so far. So Stephanie's
Yeah,
next
that's good.
question.
Thanks.
Yes, the next question is, how do we define affiliation? This is something I've wondered about as someone who is no longer a student, but still hoping to publish my work I completed as a student, but without any institutional funding. That's a good point.
Yes. So you could any affiliation. So even people in private practice, if you have a private practice, that could be your affiliation, which then actually promotes your private practice. And then also, if you're working within different organizations and institutions, it's usually an honor for you to include your affiliation somewhere for them, if that is appropriate. So like a hospital, usually they would love for you to publish as an art therapist, and then for you to be affiliated as the art therapist with that hospital, as an example. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a university or institution.
Okay, that looks okay. There's another question from Stephanie. We'll get right on to that. So the next question is, do you have any recommendations for anonymizing images without sacrificing their contribution to the work? Say if an autoethnography incorporates a self-portrait.
That's a hard one. So the integrity of the image, yeah, that would have to be like a case by case scenario, I think, for like how like who would know you on the editor review board, where your images are. Sometimes it may not be like completely anonymous just because of like the integrity of the works. So I've had like an author say like, I need this part, it's an autoethnography, people may recognize me, but I try and submit it to people who have no idea who this person is in the world. So that's, or at least try as much as I can. So that's like, we'll try and do as much as we can in that regard. And then if someone like a peer reviewer recognizes that person, they may mention it to me. But if it is like, a perfect self-portrait and you have your image everywhere, that would be very hard. So you may just, I don't know, mask certain details that would identify you, I imagine, within the image, if it's an of like self-portrait. Yeah. And it
Great,
becomes
thanks.
more difficult, I think, as authors continue to publish too, in terms of like knowing who people are. Does
Hey,
that answer? Yeah.
I think we're good. Yeah, got a thumbs up. Perfect. Okay, so the next question is from Jasmine. The question is, can you talk a bit about what some of the case study reporting standards would be? Is there a PDF for this for more practical research approaches?
We would still probably fit it in with the qualitative, because a case study is a qualitative study. So qualitative is that kind of overall framework where there's different methodologies like heuristic research within it, case study research within it. And with the qualitative journal reporting standards, it's any descriptive data is how they've included it. So you could even fit in your autoethnographies in that category as well. But it's really about being like very clear about the process and your intention of what you did and who has done things before you. So you would still look at it with that lens. But it would still talk about practice, but all of those details about how you go about it are really what the journal article reporting standards are helping you talk about and helping you write about, if that makes sense. So it would fit into the qualitative category. Okay, perfect. Thumbs up from Jasmine. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, the next question is from Lisa. It reads, can you explain how to move into and through the book review process? What are the
Yes.
first steps to do that?
Okay, first you would contact me and say, I want to do a book review. And then you can let me know what your like credentials are, affiliations are. I may ask those details for you and your subject matters that you would be interested in. And then I would connect to the publishers and say, or if you have a book that you want to review that's been published within the past 2 years, you're welcome to say, I would like to review this book. We haven't published about it before. It's been published within the past 2 years, and I'm can I have a copy of it? And then I would connect with the publishers who would send you a copy. It could be an ebook or it could be a printed copy. It's up to them what they send. And you can also connect with me if they say they'll send you a copy and you didn't receive it. But they would then consent and say, okay, this is okay. We're going to send it to this individual. And then they send you the book, and you have the book review guidelines, which are a helpful way that I would be looking at, or other people would be looking at what you've said about the book. It's more of a guide. And then afterwards, You would send in your book review. Usually it takes about 6 weeks-ish. If you need more time, you can let me know. It depends. It's again a back and forth process. Finally, you'd submit the book review and you would get feedback, and we would move from there into that standard process. It is not it's not an anonymous peer review process. It's considered like it doesn't go through that stage. So it's more of a back and forth in terms of publication standard stuff. Yeah. So that's what happens with a book review. And then you have it published. And you get a free book.
Yeah. I remember seeing something about book reviewing on the CATA website a while
Yes.
ago, and I thought, hey, that sounds actually really fantastic. So I'm really glad someone asked about this question. It's a
Yeah.
good way to sort of get your toe into the research and also have you read, but also reflect on what you're reading and help us as research clinicians like interpret all of the literature that is out there, you know? So I think that's a really fantastic question. I hope we
Yes.
answered that sufficiently enough, Lisa. Yeah, thanks. Okay, and the next question is from Kate. And the question reads, can we publish content that has been partially presented at a conference?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not published, so it's often quite common for authors to be able to present something and then publish on it later. And also our special issues are connected, usually one of our special issues. So we publish 2 times a year. And so each year, one of our special issues is connected to the conference theme, where we invite all of the presenters and conference, anyone involved in the conference to be able to publish their work in the journal related to this special theme. So we're very like connected with what's happening with CATA, and we absolutely invite presenters to publish.
Yeah, perfect. I think that was I think that was our last question, unless there's any more in the chat that I haven't seen so far. But yeah, really wonderful questions. Thank you guys again. Really, really wonderful conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your wonderful questions. And I really appreciate your artwork that you've shared about yourself as a researcher. I think that they're so dynamic, and it creates that sense of connection and community about researchers connecting together. Even if we're just starting, even if we just want to like dive in and try it. Luckily with a capstone and a thesis, you get to be able to do that. And now sharing it in a journal article is like a really brave and courageous and helpful and wonderful next step. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. Yeah, and taking the time. And if you have any extra questions that come up, you're welcome to connect with me. Perfect. Thank you. Even writing about, I'm just gonna throw this out here, even writing about how hard it is to do research as an art therapist is an interesting article. So even talking about how hard it is, and even talking about the challenges that you have, if you are like brave, you can put that, say, autoethnography is a lovely way, or a heuristic, or even an arts-based study, and just share your experience of publishing and writing is a really cool topic, because more people need to know like what it feels like to do it and to connect with you. And it is involved in art therapy, is what it's like to publish and what it's like to be a student, what it's like to do research. All of these pieces are really important. So thank you again, everyone. Take care. Have
Thank you
a
so
great
much.
weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for being
Bye.
here. Take good care.